Welcome to my channel, Black Diaspora Talk, Love and Light to You. I am your host, Jalathea, and as you see by the title, we are going to be talking about why Black folks are leaving Christianity. Now, side note, this is my first official YouTube video as it pertains to Black Diaspora Talk, which is an extension of my online store, Realm of Alchemy. So on this channel, I basically cover all things Black issues and Black history and science. So please feel free to subscribe to this channel. You can also follow the community page on Instagram at Realm of Alchemy, which is, again, an extension of my online store, which has inspired this channel as I have done much shadow work or quote-unquote introspection per se. Now, back to the question at hand on why Black people are leaving Christianity, or more so religion. I myself am a quote-unquote Black American, but this channel is for the diaspora and those whom are seeking to be genuinely enlightened. Okay, emphasis on genuinely. So, I have to ask myself this question on why Blacks are leaving Christianity, or more so religion, because I have been starting to observe for myself more and more Black people separating themselves from any specific religion, but more so Christianity, since I am in America. And obviously, I am not the only one who has noticed, because I am seeing stuff on social media platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook of more and more Black people leaving the church. And the media has gotten noticed, because I'm seeing more and more news articles and blogs and threads about Blacks separating themselves from traditional religion of our parents and grandparents that was taught, that was right to them, okay? Because that's what they grew up being taught. Now, one thing that is an unwritten rule in the Black community is you don't go against the church or Jesus. So it's not surprising it's being reported, because it's happening in higher numbers than usual. So this one article in particular that was written pretty recently, this past April, it was on a blog called 538.com. They talk about a whole bunch of things on that blog, but they have a specific religion tab. So it was written on April 16th to be exact, and this is the title you are looking at on your screen here, along with the author, and it's exploring how it's more than just white liberals and millennials leaving the church. And it gives some very interesting numbers when looking at the Black community. So this is the first screenshot here. Okay, it's pretty interesting, because if you look at the first red highlight, you see it says, and you, before I get into it, you can feel free to go to this website at any time and read this article. It is 538.com, okay? And I will link it down below. So it goes on to say, compared to the U.S. population overall, non-religious Americans are younger and more democratic leaning. And then it goes on to say, quote, about 1/3 of nuns, 32%, are people of color, end quote. Interesting. And by the way, they are using the acronym nuns to describe non-religious people, because as they say in the article, when asking their religion, they say quote unquote none. Then we have the next part that you're looking at here on your screen. You are free to pause and read that for yourself, but notice the last couple of sentences. Quote, many Black Americans under 50, like their non-Black counterparts, are disengaged from religion. About 1/3 of Black millennials are religiously unaffiliated, compared to 11% of Black baby boomers, according to Pew, end quote. 1/3 of Black Americans is quite a bit when compared with when you compare it with how many Black Americans there are in the U.S. And it is a known fact that the dominant religion is not only Christianity around the world, but in America, especially within the Black community. Now, this last part I want to show before getting into the discussion. It says, quote, the Black Lives Matter movement, BLM movement, has coordinated with Black churches and Black religious people. And that collaboration is likely to be eased by the fact that Black nuns, non-religious people, are rarely atheists or agnostics, and therefore don't have the negative feelings about churches and religious organizations that people in those groups often do. About 12% of non-religious Blacks are atheists or agnostics, compared to about 39% of religiously unaffiliated white people, end quote. So it's not majority blacks leaving the church because they're not spiritual or they don't have a belief system. They're just not religious. They don't want to confine to the constraints of organized religion. So, to the question, why are black people leaving Christianity? Let's get into it. According to Britannica, it is the religious belief system that is based around the life, teachings, and death of Jesus Christ. In other words, to be a follower of Christ. That is the quote definition of Christianity. So interestingly enough, if you look at the etymology of the word Christian, it comes from the Greek word Christianos. Okay, so it is the English translation of Christian. Well, Christian is the English translation of the Greek word Christianos. All right. So let's look at some of the main doctrines of Christianity. So the first main doctrine: Jesus died for your sins, for everyone's sins. So he loves everyone. That is the first main doctrine of Christianity. The next main doctrine is salvation. It is a key Christian doctrine with the core belief that, quote, Jesus saves. Okay, now that meaning can actually be debated amongst different Christian denominations, but for the most part, the basis is that Jesus saves. You get your salvation through Jesus Christ. And then the next part of the doctrine that's pretty important, the third part, is the Holy Trinity. Now, that is a key Christian doctrine that there is one God in three forms: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So this also ties in with the Christian belief that Jesus was God in the flesh. However, Jesus is also referred to as the Son of God. Some Christians take the Bible to be read as literal, while mainline Christians believe it's not a history or a biographical textbook, but instead believe it to be a first-hand account of a point in time in history where God revealed himself to his chosen people of Israel and then to the rest of the world through Jesus Christ. That, to sum it up, is the foundation of Christianity amongst all denominations, whether Protestant or Methodist or Roman Catholic. They have the same basic principles. Okay. So who were the earliest Christians? That's another question we have to look at when dissecting the question of why blacks are leaving Christianity or religion. So we have to go way back in history when discussing the history of the origins of Christianity. Ironically, you have to go back before the witness and testimony of Christ, which the general public would call BC, which is before Christ, or before the, testimony of Christ. Okay, so as far back as the end of ancient Egyptian history, when it was ruled by the Nubians, it came to an end around 332 BC, so around 332 years before Christ was testified to have came by the people of Judea. So this period was called the Hellenistic period, and it's just a really fancy word for Greek. So this was the Greek rule over Egypt. So the Greeks conquered Egypt and formed their own dynasty. In ancient Egyptian history, the rulers were called pharaohs, but when the Greeks took over and formed their own dynasty, it was called the Ptolemaic dynasty, that ruled over Egypt for almost 3 centuries, which is 300 years, until somewhere around 30 BC, or 30 years before Christ, when the Roman Empire took over, which Greeks became a part of, because the Greek was literally an extension of Roman Empire later on down the line. So side note, this is where the debate about Cleopatra being an Egyptian woman comes from. She was a woman from Alexandria, which is in Greece. She was not a native African Egyptian. She was never an African Egyptian, but a Greek woman from Alexandria. And by the way, all the quote-unquote queens of Greek queens of Egypt were called Cleopatra, not just one woman. Anyway, back to around 332 BC, When the first ruler of Egypt, Ptolemy I Soter, wanted to make an effort to integrate Greek and Egyptian religion to align more with the Greek rulers and the Greeks that were moving into Egypt and assuming the status of a quote-unquote Egyptian, because they were not Egyptians, they were Greek citizens who were claiming Egyptian citizenship since, they took over Egypt. And they exiled the Egyptians, or if they didn't exile them, they forced them into a status of servitude. So Ptolemy and his council created the deity/god named Serapis Christus, Christus meaning Christ. He was also known and referred to as the quote-unquote sun god in ancient Greek times. They later spelled his name Serapis when the Roman Empire took over and conquered Greece and Egypt. Now, Serapis was actually the Greeks' version of the combination of two Egyptian deities or gods, Osiris and the bull of Apis, hence the name Serapis or Serapis. So Osiris and Apis were ironically both known for death and resurrection, vegetation, fertility, and life. This was done by Ptolemy so it would be recognizable and relatable to the Greeks that were migrating into Egypt from Greece, since they were now the new inhabitants of the land. So they again forced the native Egyptians to either be exiled or they were forced into a status of servitude if they did not leave. So the Greeks were not too fond of animal symbols to represent rulers and whatnot, so they had to compromise the Egyptian religion with the Greek religion. So Serapis was considered a quote-unquote miracle worker, and he was also called the sun god. He was sacrificed for the sins of Egypt annually. His followers were called Christians. He was known for resurrection, life, and vegetation, and he was the god of the underworld with a 3-headed dog at his feet to be a guardian. And Christus literally translates to Christ in English. Okay? And these are just facts. All right? Keep in mind, by definition, to be a Christian is to be a follower or believer in Christ. So the argument could come up that this was a false teaching and it does not reflect modern Christianity, since modern Christianity didn't arise until after the coming of Jesus. But why would they refer to themselves as Christian when they knew that was a pagan term? They knew it was a pagan term because, remember, many also worship Serapis, since Rome and Greek culture are very, very similar, as the Romans were inspired by the Greeks and the Greeks were inspired by the Egyptians. And they added to the Roman Empire. So the Romans are the ones who killed Jesus Christ, and they also established the Roman Catholic Church. So prior to the death of Jesus, much of Rome was either pagan or practicing Judaism. Therefore, they were claiming to be a Jew. The king of Rome, ironically, King Herod, was an Idumean king, which means Edomite or Edom in Hebrew. So he was a Edomite king, but he, was ruling over Rome. Because his father, who was also an Edomite or an Idumean, he was also in good graces with Julius Caesar. So Herod is said to have been a convert to Judaism, and many of the Pharisees living in Judea at that time were also claiming to be quote-unquote Jews. They also claimed Jesus was a Jew, which is implying Jesus practiced Judaism. Yet to say to follow him, Jesus, is to be a Christian, but to call him a Jew at those times meant that he practiced Judaism. So what were believers in Jesus Christ called prior to his coming? Because they were practicing Judaism and claiming to be Jews, including Herod. He was a convert. So they crucified Jesus for blasphemy, since they also labeled him a Jew. So just when did Christianity come to be associated with Jesus? Especially when pagan Christianity existed before Jesus Christ, which again was the worship of Serapis. That was the pagan Christianity. When did it become widespread, and who was responsible? That's the next part of the question when looking at why blacks are leaving Christianity. When did it become widespread? Who was responsible? After the death of Jesus, Christians were persecuted and killed by Jesus. since they began associating Christianity with the following and the teachings of Jesus, and they claimed that Jesus was God in the flesh. The quote-unquote Jews did not like that, so they slowly began to disassociate themselves from Christians, and so many of the Christians were being killed by the Jews because of that. So not only were the Jews being killed, not only were the Christians being persecuted and killed by the Jews, but they were also being persecuted and killed by the Romans, because many of the Romans were still pagan. So because Judaism is the parent to both Islam and Christianity, as it is said to be a common point of foundation of core values and beliefs. Again, during the time of Jesus, who was called a Jew by the Romans, the land of Israel, which consists of Judea, Galilee, Samaria, etc., was already ruled by an Idumean Roman king, which was Herod. And again, people living there already are claiming themselves to be quote-unquote Jews by the way of conquering the land of Judea through the Assyrian king. Now, Judaism, interestingly enough, is never mentioned in the Old Testament. The people who were originally in Judea, Samaria were called, quote, Israelites. They were exiled to Assyria by the Assyrian king when he conquered and replaced them being Israelites. The Assyrian king replaced them with the Assyrian people from Assyria. That is actually mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 7, verses 5 through 7. Excuse me, I said chapter 7. I meant chapter 17. It's going to be found in 2 Kings chapter 17, 5 through 7, and it reads, "The king of Assyria invaded the whole land, marched up to Samaria, and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and carried away the Israelites to Assyria, where he settled them in Halah, in Gozan by the harbor river, and in the cities of Medeb. All this happened because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They had worshipped other gods and walked in the customs of the nations that the Lord had driven out before the Israelites, as well as in the practices introduced by the king of Israel." The Assyrians assumed their identity since they were now in their land, which is Judea, and they converted to Judaism and now ruled the land and claimed citizenship, which is in 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 24. And it reads, "Then the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kutah, Ava, Hama, and Sevarium, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took possession of Samaria and lived in its towns." So in other words, by the time Jesus came and the Jews who were practicing Judaism claimed Jesus was a Jew whom they accused of blasphemy, they weren't even the real Jews or inhabitants of the land. They, just like King Herod, were converts. So keep in mind the Romans were pagan, as they had much Greek influence from the Hellenistic area, which mixed with ancient Egyptian culture. So even though some claimed to practice Judaism and be Jewish converts, many were also pagan, and paganism mixed with Judaism. So if they claim Jesus a Jew, which means they're saying he was practicing Judaism, where did Christianity, or should I say modern Christianity, come into play? After the death of Christ in the 1st century AD, a man named John Hyrcanus I, sorry if I mispronounced that, he was the founder, or he was the new ruler of Judea and Idumea. Excuse me. So he forced Judaism conversion on the rest of Judea and Idumea for those who are not already practicing Judaism. So this can be found in the Apocrypha in a book called the Maccabees. And this, interestingly enough, as it pertains to history, was also written by Roman historian and Jewish convert Flavius Josephus at that time, as he said, quote, "That country is called Judea, and the people Jews. And this is given to as many as embrace their religion, Judaism, though of other nations." Quote-unquote Jews began killing Christians for preaching the second coming of Jesus. Christians were also killed by Romans, who were a mix of pagans and practicing Judaism. That was the 1st century, but by the 4th century, Christianity had slowly become somewhat acceptable since it was an extension of Judaism. Because by the 4th century, Roman Emperor Constantine reigned from 306 to 337 AD. He became the first Christian emperor after a time period when it was a death sentence to be a Christian. He actually had a meeting to decide which religion was better, and he went with Christianity due to its popularity on the rise and its ties to Greek pagan history from Serapis. Therefore, it was really for political reasons. He legalized it in Rome around 319 AD. And by the way, all of this that I am saying can easily be verified by simple research. The internet has a plethora of endless educational material and articles, and not just the internet, but books written by knowledgeable scholars and historians. Okay, and I will I will link a lot of these sources below. Okay, so this was normally done for a political gain, because although he legalized the religion of Christianity, he still carried over practices and beliefs of pagan Rome. Okay, back from Greece, because remember, Rome took over Greece, but they also adopted a lot of Greek culture, which they in turn adopted a lot of Egyptian culture because of that. So it is strongly debated among scholars just when Constantine himself converted to Christianity, since he was still known to practice paganism, even though he did legalize Christianity and later convert. Many scholars hold to the truth that he converted on his deathbed. Others say it was around 312. Either way, Constantine was more focused on quote-unquote Orthodox Christianity, or quote the right way. So then you have around 380 after death. Okay, so the Emperor Theodosius, he issued the Edict of Thessalonica, which made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, the first churches in Africa were by the way of European nations, just as Islam was spread by the way of the Islamic slave trade era, which they don't really teach much about that in schools. They only teach about the really, the triangular slave trade or the transatlantic slave trade. So, when looking at the question on why blacks are leaving Christianity, you can't help but to notice the atrocities and the murders done in the name of Christianity. You have things like the Protestant Reformation, like the 80 Years' War, French War, witch trials, and etc., the Salem witch trials, and etc. You have things like the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition. You have things like forced conversions, the Holy War, the support of slavery. Christianity values were literally used to uphold slavery, support of slavery in regards to not only Christianity, but Muslims being in Islam and Jews as well, or Jewish nation. So when did black folks become Christian? And more so, why? So prior to the transatlantic slave trade, majority of Africans were not Christian. Facts. Africans were either Muslim due to the Arabic Islamic slave trade, which happened before the transatlantic slave trade. And if they were not Muslim, the majority, because only a minority were Muslim, the majority of them had a spiritual and traditional practice. They were not religious people. So prior to the invasions of foreign nations, Africans did not have any specific quote-unquote religion. Some may have heard of Christianity, but very few, if any, chose to practice it, as there is no real records of any slave who practiced European Christianity. So black people were forced and beaten into taking on the religion of their oppressors, in addition with being stripped of their tradition and customs and having their names taken away and given new ones, lost their language as they were beaten into speaking English and whatever other language of the oppressor's land they were living in. If they were in the Caribbean, they were forced to speak some type of Spanish or some other type of English dialect. If they were living in Latin America, they were forced to speak Spanish. So here in America, they were forced to speak English. Their names were taken away, okay? So they lost touch of their culture from who they were long ago. So what I want to know is, when looking at the question of why blacks believe in Christianity, you can't kind of help but to understand why. Because what Christianity ignores is a lot of lies and contradictions. There are so many versions and transliterations of transliterations and translations of translations. The Bible is literally transliterated and translated and transliterated and translated and transliterated and translated time after time after time again, to the point that it's still happening today. The Bible is still being transliterated and translated today. New versions of the Bible are still being printed. So why are we not taught some of the real truths, or the real truths? That's what a lot of blacks leaving Christianity, that's the question that they have to the ones who choose to stay, is why are you ignoring certain questions? And this is not to attack anybody, because we all have a right to do as we choose. We all have free will, but we also have to be logical and look at the facts. Why are we not taught things like the real name of the Most High? The Most High God, by the way, because God is not a name. That is a title. Anything can be somebody's God. Money is a lot of people's God these days. Okay? Addictions are people's gods these days. So anything can be a God. God does not, that's not a name. So why don't we talk about that? Better yet, why is it only found, his name, the Most High's name, why is it only found one time in the whole Bible? And that's only in the King James Version. And that is in Psalms 68, verse 4. Says, sing unto God, sing praises to his name. Extol him that rideth upon the heavens by his name, Jah, and rejoice before him. Interestingly, the letter J was not added to the alphabet until about 300 years ago. The letter J replaced the letter Y, so his name would be Yah. That being the case, then, how can the name of, quote, Christ be Jesus? Because again, the letter J did not come into existence until about 300 years ago. And in the 1600s version of the King James Bible, it was like spelled I-E-S-V-S, because again, the letter J did not exist. So how can Jesus be his name unless that is not his name? What's even more crazy is the real names of the prophets are not taught. Isaiah is really Yeshaya. Joshua is really Yoshiah. Zephaniah is really Zephaniah. Nehemiah is Nehemiah. Elijah is Eliah. And Jeremiah is Jeremiah. Obadiah is Obadiah. And etc., so on and so on. So you realize that all these prophets have his name. And it's crazy because I promise there is a verse in the Bible that says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. Okay, and I cannot call the verse right now. Somebody is feel free to correct me and fill in the blank in the comments. But I'm gonna go look that up as soon as I'm done with this video. But the verse, it says, if my people which are called by my name, and nobody talks about that. Like literally, those prophets have his name, like right there. So how about, like, why don't we talk about things like the real names and of the places and nations that the Bible was referring to? Nobody wants to talk about that. Or the group of people the Bible was talking about. That's even more shocking. That's what's really shocking. Like it was written with by a whole bloodline of people. That's what's shocking. But nobody talks about things like that. Or about the dietary laws, or the existence of giants, mermaids, and demons walking in human form, succubuses and incubuses and sleep paralysis, demon possession and mental illness in the black community. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about the missing books of the Bible, like the Jubilees, the Maccabees, the Enoch. Boy, is it juicy in Enoch. A man that walked with God 300 years and his book was removed from the Bible. But it still remains only in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. If you want to read the book of Enoch, you need to purchase it, or better yet, purchase the Apocrypha. That contains most of the missing books of the Bible. By the way, the Roman Catholic Church decided what was going to be in the Bible and what was not, because The Apocrypha at one point in time was literally by law required to be in the Bible. And if it was not in printed versions of the Bible, and if it was not, you were fined. That was at one point in time, but that is no longer. Okay. So also things like the book of Jasher. The book of Jasher. Nobody wants to talk about the book of Jasher. That book was mentioned in the Bible at least twice. The first time it was mentioned in 2 Samuel 1:18. It says, and he told them to teach the children of Judah the song of the bow. Indeed, it is written in the book of Jasher. Interesting. The book of Jasher is not in the Bible, but it mentions the book of Jasher. Okay. Then you got it again in Joshua 10:13. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and has to not to go down about a whole day. Like, come on now. Why are we not talking about these things? Why is it so taboo? Why is it not a hot topic? So next bullet point, when looking at the question on why blacks believe in Christianity or religion, you have to look at what was our practice before slavery, before we migrated to West Africa. Because just like any other nation at that time, we too were migrating, especially due to many invasions in northern Africa. Believe it or not, that was not the first time our people were slaves or were in positions of servitude, better yet to say. So why are black people leaving Christianity? Is there any damage that was done? Any lies that have been taught? That's why I would want to leave a religion. So how has Christianity benefited us as a people? How has it benefited us as a people? Think about it. The pillar of the black community is the church. Almost on every corner in a predominantly black neighborhood is a liquor store and a church. Anytime we as a people are killed, oppressed, attacked, etc., we resort to the result of the same thing time after time. Protesting and praying to Jesus for change. What has protesting honestly done? Many say if it was not for protesting, we would not have integration. But was integrating really a win? Was it a big time win for the community, for the black community? Was it a big time win for us? Because think about it, a lot of the black inventors invented those things prior to segregation. Prior to integration. Okay, so a lot of the black inventors invented those things during the times of segregation. It was prior to integration. So hate crimes seem to have spiked against blacks after integration. Trauma in the black community and black children spiked. Black communities, black families increased in the reports of mental illness. Christianity teaches us to love everyone and to turn the other cheek when we are wronged, so we can give them the other cheek to smite us as well. The same thing our ancestors were taught during slavery. Ironic. Even more so ironic, one of the first slave ships that set ship from the Africas to America was called, quote, the good ship Jesus. I don't know about you, but I find it extremely toxic for a systemic religion to tell a group of people who have been oppressed for hundreds of years that turning the other cheek and embracing our enemy or oppressor is what God would want us to do. Forgetting that God made it very clear in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, 1-8, he can be a God of war and vengeance, and that there is most certainly a time for everything, including a time for war, hate, love, peace, etc. Our pastors never preach or promote a time of war or hate. Only love and peace. Do we see how traumatizing, toxic, and damaging to the black mind and spirit and mental this has to be? The cognitive dissonance so many in the black diaspora feel because of world history when it comes to our history, which we are not taught past 400 years. Why are we at the bottom of society? In almost every continent, in every country, we are treated last and crapped on first. We are stricken with so many mental diseases, genetic diseases, family issues, economic hardship, strife in partner relationships. Black women are the least likely to get married, but the most successful group of people. There's so much strife against the black man and the black woman. There's strife against the black woman and the daughter. There's fighting for equality in all forms. So many generational curses within our community. And what is the church doing about this? Are those funds going to our pastor in foreign nations, or to the black community to start our own businesses again and to rebuild Black Wall Street and have actual ownership of things? Other nations have shops cater to our community, set up in our neighborhoods, making profit and going back into their own communities with that profit, along with the fast food chains and liquor stores. It would seem better to move into suburban areas or quote-unquote white-only areas, only to be subconsciously anxious about interactions with those around you. Christianity promotes nothing to aid the black community other than a faith in a man named, quote, Jesus Christ, whose name wasn't even actually Jesus Christ. But even faith without works is dead. Other communities build and uplift one another and give back to their community with their business profits that they get from other communities, more specifically the black community. Black people are one of the only nations that are not actively doing this as a people. I'm not talking about on an individual level. Yes, we have many successful black individuals, but the percentage is so low when it comes to as a people, as a nation. We are too busy being consumers. Floyd Rose, a senior servant at Serenity Church, said on April 17, 2016 in an interview, "The Chinese are not integrated and don't ask for it. They have their own Chinatown. The Vietnamese are not integrated and they don't ask for it. They have their own Little Hanoi. Cubans are not integrated and don't ask for it. They have their own Little Havana. These groups build their own communities, have their own stores, restaurants, and churches. They see Jesus through their eyes of their own culture. They have their own economy, select their own politicians, elect them, and then collect from them." He then goes on to say, "The white and black churches are separated but not segregated. Whites are not denied admission to black churches, and neither are blacks denied admission to white churches. However, blacks who attend white churches don't run them, and the few whites who attend black churches don't run them. There are obvious cultural differences that are quickly recognized and respected by both cultures," end quote. And it's true. Even more ironic is that the money from white churches is usually invested in banks and community property and construction, or, back into their own community. Where's the money in the black churches going, and what are we really being delivered from by giving our money? Money was never asked as a sacrifice from God. That was actually incorporated during the beginning of the Catholic Church, when the church and state were merged. So this has been a lot to unpack, y'all. I hope I didn't lose anybody, confuse anybody. And again, this was not meant to attack anybody's personal opinions or beliefs. We are all entitled to our own. Again, this is a channel where dialogue is encouraged. I'm not here to bash anybody's opinions, as I hope no one is here to bash mine. But a lot of what I have presented to you here is facts. Influence, some mixed in with my own thoughts, as I am a part of the group who is no longer a part of the Christianity religion. I know it can be a lot to dismantle white lies that have been openly hidden in not only scripture but history and even Hollywood, okay? Because we have to remember that there was a period in time in history that was called the Dark Ages, and that was a point in time where nobody was allowed to even touch the Bible, look at the Bible, not even own it. And if you were caught with one, you were killed. Why was that? And who was rewriting things at that time? So there is just so much more to get into discussing the hardships that not only Black Americans face, but the diaspora as a whole. So I'm going to leave you with these questions. Why doesn't our history go past 100 years? Why does the first Black church built in Savannah, Georgia have Hebrew cursive writing engraved in the pews by the slaves? What language did they speak before slavery? And why was the first slave ship called the Good Ship Jesus? Why is there so many denominations of Christianity and so many different religions and so many different versions of the Bible? Why do we as a people want validation? As a Black people, why do we want validation, acceptance, and integration with others so badly? Why do immigrant communities have more business and wealth than us? Why do we own more businesses and stick together and support one another during segregation than we do today? Seriously, we literally had more businesses and stuck together more during segregation than we do today. Why are we renting on stolen land? Why are our men dying by cops, our women dying by hospitals, and our children dying from diseases that are only really predominantly known, like cancer, to hit people who are usually older, not as babies? Like, what's in our food and our water? Why are there more churches in the Black community than actual businesses? And why are there more foreign businesses in the Black community than Black businesses? Why are we, as a whole, not individuals, why are we at the bottom in every country of the diaspora in the world? Are we a cursed people? That's the topic for the next video. So make sure you subscribe to this channel if you found anything in this video interesting. Like and share this video. Stay tuned for the next video for that convo, and I hope to hear from you guys soon. Shalom.